Hey everyone! I can't believe that about a year ago at this point I was studying abroad in Madrid, Spain. I have all those videos documented and I was planning on watching them about a year from when it happened, waiting for enough time to pass that I could look back at them and be like, whoa, I can't believe this happened like a year ago already or however long ago. So I'll be going through those soon. You guys can watch them as well, feel free to. But today what we're going to talk about is the Romance languages. Now, I don't know Italian, I've never studied Italian, nor have I studied Romanian, that is also a Romance language, but I have studied Spanish, French, and Brazilian Portuguese, so I'll be talking about those three since I do have some knowledge on the three. So Spanish, French, and Portuguese are Romance languages. They're in the same family of languages, they stem from the same root, which means that the three of them are obviously going to have similarities. Sometimes one language may seem closer to another one than another language, and then other times other languages may seem closer to that one. What do I mean by that? Well, I know that Spanish and Portuguese are extremely close, which is why I was able to pick up on Portuguese very quickly as I was learning. Sometimes words match in other languages. I've also heard that Spanish and Italian are very close to each other. My mom is able to understand Italian by just listening to it without having learned it. I've also heard from native Portuguese speakers that Italian and Portuguese sound even closer. Also, people learning Italian who have heard me speak Portuguese say that they think Portuguese is closer to Italian than Spanish. I don't know, I've never studied Italian before, so if you've studied all of these languages, let me know in the comments section because I would love to know that and I don't want to be giving out false information. So, these languages have some similarities in words, in grammar, and in sentence structure in general. These three languages are structured like English. First, you have the subject, so I, you, he, she, it, they, whatever. Then you have the verb, so I what? I walked, I sang, I cleaned, I took a shower, and then the object. I took a shower in the bathroom, or I walked the dog, or I went to school. Structured like that, all three languages. What I think is interesting about this is that sometimes the Romance languages can be closer to English, like French for instance, because in English, when it comes to sentence structure, you always have to put the pronoun. So you always have to say, I walk, because you can't just say walk. You don't know who's walking. Do you walk? Do I walk? Do they walk? Who walks? So you always need the pronoun. The same thing goes for French because a lot of the times when you conjugate a verb, it sounds the same. So you need that pronoun in order to tell you if it's not written. But even when you're writing, you do need to write the pronoun. You need that pronoun to tell you who we're talking about here. Whereas in Spanish and Portuguese, it's implied. You don't always need the pronoun, which I really like about the two languages because sometimes you get lazy and you don't want to specify all the time. Another thing that they have in common is words. Words that stem from the same language in the language family, but are made into their own thing with their own pronunciation, but have the same meaning, very similar spellings, etc. So, some examples of that would be adjectives, like, for instance, the word difficult. In French, difficile. In Spanish, difícil. And then in Portuguese, difícil. All sound very similar, all spelled similarly. You could tell, you could probably guess if you've never spoken one of the languages in this list that they mean similar things. Then you have another word like to break, which in French, there are multiple ways to say to break, but the one I'm going to use is rompre. Rompre. Sorry if my pronunciation is not that great. I am not a native French speaker. Spanish, romper. And Portuguese, romper. Romper. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right. Once again, I'm told I speak like a Spanish speaker when I'm speaking in Portuguese. But you can use websites like Forvo to hear the pronunciation from native speakers on your own. Another example of a word, nationalities are all very similar. So if you want to say American, French, Américain or Américaine. Spanish, if you're not saying estadounidense, you could say americano, americana. And then Portuguese, americano, americana. So, other examples, Mexican, 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 Mexicano, Mexicana, Mexicano, Mexicana, Korean, 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 Coreano, Coreano, and then Coreana, Coreana, those types of things. So, there are many verbs and words, there are many cognates that go across these languages, sometimes even into English, as you can tell. And then the grammar. The grammar itself is pretty similar as well. As I said, the sentence structure was similar, but also the grammar in the sense of how things work. So when it comes to grammar, we had to do a bunch of conjugation tables when I was studying these languages in high school and at college. So when you're conjugating a verb, you have three types of verbs. Of course, there's irregular and regular verbs, but in French you have ER, IR, and RE verbs. In Spanish you have AR, ER, IR verbs, and the same goes for Portuguese. Some verbs resemble each other more than others. So do some of the conjugation patterns if you make a T-table for each of the conjugations. So when you're speaking in French, usually the endings you stick onto a verb in the present tense. We're just going to cover the present tense because this is an overall view of how the three languages are similar. When you're conjugating a verb, you have the I form, like me. So you have at the end, when it's an ER verb, you have E. Oh, well, this will be backwards for you. I shouldn't be drawing in the air. But you would have E, ES, E, ONS, EZ, ENT. For Spanish, you have an ER verb. You have O, ES, E, EMOS, EIS, and then EN. So for Portuguese, when I was studying, I know there's like multiple forms to conjugate verbs and everything. I was learning Brazilian Portuguese and I only learned how to say I do something, and then you will say, that's how I learned how to say you, and then I learned the plural form and the plural form like us, we. So for those, when you would conjugate an ER verb, you would have an O for the me form, the I form. Then you would have E, then you would have EMOS, and then you would have EM instead of EN. So you could tell that it's really similar. It was fascinating when I started taking Portuguese. I had learned Spanish first for a few years, then I started learning French, then I added in Portuguese after doing French for a period of time and making sure that I had a good grasp on it before starting Portuguese because I did not want to mix any of them up. But it was amazing looking in the book 501 Portuguese Verbs. So I opened it up. This was before taking my first Portuguese class. I actually had no idea. I didn't know anything about Portuguese except that it's close to Spanish. I didn't even know how close it was. I would listen to it and I'd be like, I can understand a few words, but that's about it. So I opened up this book and I saw the endings for each of the verbs, and I noticed that they were all very similar or the same as the verbs in Spanish. When I saw that AR verbs had pretty much the same endings, I was like, wow, this is going to be easier than I thought. The only problem is when you learn languages that are very similar, you don't want to mix them up. And that topic will be in a separate video because this is just a comparison of the three languages. So, If you are choosing between these three languages and which one you want to study and which one you think is easier, it's really up to you. It's up to the opinion of the person who's studying because, for instance, I have talked to people who said that French is harder than Spanish. I've talked to people who have said Spanish is harder than French. It varies from person to person. If you want my personal opinion, of course, I'm a little bit biased because I did grow up with a little bit, very, very little Spanish influence from hearing the TV and having little bilingual dolls and stuff, but I thought Spanish was easier to learn than French because it's phonetic. So when you hear something, you pretty much know how to spell it. And I think after a long time in French, I was able to do that after a long time. But even to this day, with all the silent letters that there are, you really can't always guess the spelling and be accurate. The pronunciation of Spanish is easier. Now, for a native English speaker, I think both are difficult, especially if you don't know how to roll your R's or do the French R. So really, that is up to you. In Portuguese, I learned that R's are not that way when they're at the beginning of a word or like a double R. So that might be a little bit easier, but also there are things that are difficult to pronounce in Portuguese than in Spanish or French. I've also had people say that Portuguese is one of the most difficult languages out there. I read it online somewhere, I can't remember where I read that. But for me, it wasn't as difficult. Of course, I still make mistakes. I'm not going to be perfect. I haven't studied it for a really long time or anything. But knowing Spanish and French has helped that a lot, has helped me guess more accurately what to say if I don't know how to say something. So the choice is up to you. I think that Spanish is the easier one of the three, because in Portuguese, Spanish you use a lot of subjunctive, and then in Portuguese you have future subjunctive. So if you don't like those things, I would recommend French, but then also the past tense is like this compound tense that you don't exactly do in Spanish. You do have a compound tense, but you also have just a past tense with conjugations. And if you don't know all this terminology, this probably sounds like really weird and like I'm rambling, but quick answer, it's up to you which one you want to study. And if you've studied one before, I recommend choosing another Romance language because they're similar. You'll pick up on it quicker. Of course, you have to have an interest in it. Don't study it for the sake of, I just want another language under my belt, because that's not worth it. You won't have motivation, that'll die down pretty quickly, and it won't stick with you. So, choice is yours. I'm glad that I chose these three languages to study. One of them was because of family, the other two kind of just fell into my lap. I really had no other choice. And I hope that this video helped, and that you guys have a great week. Alright, bye everyone, see you next week! Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to press the like button so I can know to make more content like this. Also, remember to leave a comment telling me if you like these kind of videos, or if you want me to make other kinds of videos. Also, remember to subscribe so that you can know when my new videos come out. They come out every week. Also, you can check my blog for other content on travel and language learning, and you can check my Twitter for updates.